I call this meeting to order. So welcome everyone to meeting number 42 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to the order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, firearms. So today we have two panels of witnesses. For the first hour, we have, by video conference, we have the Association des Directeurs de Police du Québec, Pierre Brochet, President. We have Association Canadienne des Chefs de Police, Evan Bray, co-chair, Special Purpose Committee on Firearms. And we have the Fédération de la Police Nationale, Brian Sauvé, President. So we'll give each group up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, I have a question for you. Before we begin the testimonies, can we just make sure that sound tests have been carried out indeed, and that the interpreters have can confirm that these tests have been done, because I'm seeing that the majority of our witnesses are online right now.
Please, I'm sorry, please say it again.
Do you want me to repeat? Are you ready now? Okay. Okay, can you confirm to us that the sound tests have been done and that it's okay with the interpreters? Because I'm seeing that the majority of our witnesses are going to be joining us by video conference. I'm just trying to make sure that the sound is good and okay for the interpreters.
Absolutely, thank you for that. That's a very good point. The clerk has assured me that the sound checks have been done and everyone has proper equipment. Yes? Okay.
Génial, merci.
Perfect, thank you.
So we'll start now with the Association des Directeurs de Police de Québec. Monsieur Brochet, allez-y, s'il vous plaît, 5 minutes.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation, for inviting our association to take part in this discussion. Well, initially, the Quebec Police Directors Association actually brings together 34 police organizations all across Quebec, SPVM, RCMP, and the Sûreté du Québec, as well as other municipal police forces. So when it comes to Bill C-21, first off, I want to let you know that we are very sensitive when it comes to victims, families, their loved ones, of those who have suffered by firearm violence. So our association is very sensitive towards this issue. We also salute the strengthening of the gun control measures. I believe that this is a good message sent to all Canadians. As the Canadian society, we're sending a strong message on our willingness, on our determination to reduce the number of firearms in circulation, and also to have an impact in violence within the family setting or serial killings. We also salute the firearm buyback program. It is an important gesture which will have a certain impact, so we welcome this initiative. Of course, we have to underline that there is a whole logistics and coordination aspect that goes into this. We have to work with different provincial governments. There will be costs, important costs to this, associated with this strategy. So hopefully there will be a good exchange at the provincial level and the federal level on this. We welcome the freeze on handguns. This is a significant improvement. We are, of course, aware, as I'm sure you are, that it will take a couple generations before we see real impact, because those who have handguns keep these handguns. But again, nonetheless, this is a gesture in the right direction. We want to underline that in order to reduce the level of urban violence, in the region of Montreal, especially Montreal and Laval. We, of course, have to keep focusing on our efforts when it comes to preventing arms trafficking, firearm trafficking, and border controls, because firearms seized from criminals, especially in Quebec, for the most part, come from abroad and, of course, mostly from the United States. We would like to ask, in addition, to modernize the Act as well. There are phantom firearms, as you know, which are being developed in the market. And to produce these phantom firearms, what people do is that they order parts and pieces of firearms. So we should also think about making it illegal to possess certain firearm parts. We welcome, again, the idea of a red flag when it comes to this whole idea of protection. This will also have a significant impact when it comes to violence within the family setting. We equally welcome the maximum sentence going from 10 to 14 years. This is good news for our association. Yet we must underline that there has to be coherence with with Bill C-5, because in C-5, the minimum compulsory sentences, the intention at least, is to get rid of these for different types of crimes. We welcome the addition of two sections, which will allow the police forces, different police forces, to proceed with wiretaps when we have cases of illegal arms possession. Thank you all.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you, sir. Now we will go to the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate this opportunity. Good morning to you all. Speaking to you this morning on behalf of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, my name is Evan Bray. I'm the Chief of Police in Regina, Saskatchewan, and am the co-chair of the Special Purpose Committee on Firearms for the CACP. The CACP represents Chiefs of Police and Executive Police leadership from across Canada. The CACP believes that the proposed legislation recognizes that stopping gun violence requires a whole society approach, including education and prevention to address root causes, as well as law enforcement to help stop the criminal elements who are perpetrating violence in our communities. We believe that Bill C-21 will help prevent victimization by way of a firearm and will improve public safety. I just want to drill down to a couple of areas. First of all, handguns. The CACP supports a national versus municipal patchwork approach to managing the issue of handguns in Canada. We believe that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing access to these types of firearms while allowing existing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport. However, we continue to maintain that restricting lawful handgun ownership will not meaningfully address the real issue, which is illegal firearms, illegal handguns obtained from the United States that have led to the disturbing current trend in gun violence that is largely related to gangs, street gangs, and more sophisticated organized crime groups. With regard to firearms smuggling and trafficking, we support the implementation of new firearms-related offenses, intensified border controls, and strengthened penalties to help deter criminal activities and to combat firearms smuggling and trafficking, thereby reducing the risk that illegal firearms find their way into Canadian communities and are used to commit criminal offenses. The CACP welcomes changes that provide new police authorizations and tools to access information about license holders in the investigation of individuals that are suspected of conducting criminal activities such as straw purchasing and weapons trafficking. With regard to replica firearms, the CACP agrees with implementing initiatives that target the criminal use and diversion of firearms to the illicit market by prohibiting the importation, exportation, and sale of replica firearms, specifically those that are a likeness to real firearms and indistinguishable from the genuine articles from near or far, or that can be altered to convert them into deadly weapons. This is something that the CACP urged the government to do in a resolution passed by our membership way back in 2000, 22 years ago. Replicas are encountered in the hands of criminals for street-level extortion, robbery, personal protection from other criminals, and to intimidate or terrorize victims when committing an offense. As a result, there's been a regrettable need for police officers to resort to the use of deadly force in situations where they believe replica firearms to be real. Contributing to police concerns for public safety are also facts that imitation firearms are largely unregulated and users can acquire them very easily without proof of age, license, or competency. The CACP is not opposed to recreational activities involved the use of airsoft guns. However, those who use these replicas for recreational purposes and who emphasize the importance of the likeness to real guns and the importance of long-range shooting capacities over 500 feet per second to enhance the overall gaming experience have likely never found themselves in a real-life situation facing an individual engaged in criminal activity who's armed with one of these guns. Reducing firearm-related deaths in the cases of family violence and self-harm, this is an easy one for the CACP to support. The red flag law, the yellow flag law, the requirement to surrender firearms during a legal challenge of license revocation, those are impactful ways to reduce gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and self-harm by limiting access to firearms by those who pose a risk of harm to themselves or to others. Regarding the mandatory buyback program, of course, there's been a lot of talk about this, the requirement to make assault-style weapons permanently inoperable. The CACP is still awaiting the details on the implementation of such a program and the implications for and expectations of police services in Canada. Having said that, the CACP recognizes and understands concerns that have been expressed by certain provinces in the country about using Canadian police resources to go out and confiscate legally acquired firearms from Canadians. Ultimately, the buyback program, this early part of the buyback program, is essentially an administrative process. It's not a policing issue. As a result, such a program could be managed by entities other than police services, thereby allowing police resources to be focused on those who refuse to follow new law, and more importantly, on addressing border integrity, smuggling, and trafficking. So in conclusion, the CACP supports improving safety for the public and for frontline police officers. Reasonable requirements on responsible firearm owners need to be balanced with protective measures to help mitigate the impact of the worst outcomes of firearms. While we agree with the proposed changes of Bill C-21 in principle, we must now focus on what they mean in practice and clarify the role police services are expected to play in enforcing these regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We go now to la Fédération de la Police Nationale. Monsieur Sauvé, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
We're going to the National Police Federation. Mr. Sauvé, you have 5 minutes.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for inviting me to appear today. I'm Brian Sauvé, President of the National Police Federation, the certified bargaining agent representing close to 20,000 members of the RCMP across Canada. Firearms violence is a complex issue that requires a holistic government approach, including improvements to community and social programs, criminal justice system investments, and increased healthcare and policy resources. The NPF has made 11 recommendations in our submissions to the committee, and I will highlight some of them in my remarks today. First, the legislation primarily targets legal firearm owners who have followed the regulations as opposed to addressing the root causes of firearms violence. The Government of Canada is encouraged to widen its focus as Bill C-21 narrowly focuses on the tool or the firearm and not the criminal activity surrounding it. By only addressing the tool, you are failing to address the root problem, and the criminal perpetrator will continue to offend and victimize with different tools or in complete disregard of the legislation, as criminals do obtain firearms illegally today. Between 2016 and 21, the violent crime index across provinces rose 30%, and the crime severity index rose 10%. Jurisdictions with the highest rates of firearm-related violent crime also have relatively high rates of crime in general. Reducing firearm violence is a key issue and should remain a priority for the government. Canada already has a strict licensing regime for firearms purchases, and the changes proposed do not address issues of organized crime nor gang violence, illegal weapon smuggling, systemic causes of crime, or emerging threats such as 3D printed or ghost guns. In addition, police services need to be properly resourced. Without the adequate resources, increased police mandates apply additional pressures to uphold and maintain public safety. The government needs to recognize the importance of providing additional support to police officers to ensure that they can focus on public safety and crime prevention. This legislation must be accompanied by additional resources to RCMP members and police services across Canada. Second, the government should develop uniform standards for tracing firearms involved in the commission of a crime, ensuring that police services are adequately resourced to enhance tracing capabilities. Currently, not all firearms recovered as part of a police investigation are sent for tracing. In 2020, only 39% of firearms used in a firearm-related homicide were recovered, and of those, only 69% were sent for tracing. Third, we need to stop the illegal flow of firearms into Canada. While the RCMP and CBSA are intercepting many illegal firearms at the border, gun crimes are still becoming more prevalent, and without adequate resourcing, firearms will continue to make their way into Canada. Partnerships across jurisdictions, judges, prosecutors, government officials, in collaboration with law enforcement, are necessary to facilitate information sharing and to discovering illegal firearm trafficking patterns and crime syndicates. The RCMP's Border Integrity Program must be enhanced to enable proactive RCMP investigative weapons enforcement activity and the dismantling of gang and organized crime involved in smuggling firearms. Lastly, Bill C-21 fails to address the increasing concern over the involvement of younger persons in shootings and gun violence. In Toronto in 2021, the average age of persons involved in shootings, either as an accused or a suspect or as a person of interest, dropped from 25 to 20 years of age. It is estimated there are over 400 street gangs operated in Canada, and a whole of government approach is required to address gun and gang activity, and investments in diverting youth from joining these gangs must be an essential part of the plan. Law enforcement agencies, governments, schools, social services, neighborhood leaders, and community organizations need to work together to identify and implement effective tools and programs focused on youth at risk of gun violence. Bill C-21 should focus on tackling systemic issues that allow gun and gang violence to take place. We have an opportunity here to create a unique system to deal with this issue by strengthening border controls, imposing stronger penalties to combat firearms smuggling and trafficking, and thereby reducing the presence of illegal firearms in Canadian communities and the frequency of them being used to commit criminal offenses. Thank you, and subject to any questions.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll start our questions now with Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'm going to start off with the National Police Federation. We heard from the CACP earlier in the meeting that they said, implementing all these new regulations about guns is mostly going to be an administrative thing, not a policing thing. But we know that the RCMP and many police forces across the country are dealing with massive issues with staffing challenges. Can you comment on how the added regulatory burden of this new government legislation could impact police's ability to carry out their mandate to keep the public safe?
I can, I will start by sitting back and saying every police officer across Canada, especially the membership of the RCMP, are fairly nonpartisan. They will uphold and enforce the laws that are enacted by the legislature and interpreted by the Supreme Court of Canada. So in this case, however C-21 or a buyback program or whatever gets implemented, when called to do their duty of going to pick up firearms from firearms owners who may be considered not in compliance with that law, they will do that. However, it just adds more duties to their already expanding mandate. So at what cost does that come to the Canadian public? It creates larger screens on the dispatch screen. It creates more files for the members to go to. And are we looking at longer wait times for other?
I'm just wondering, will resources be diverted from dealing with illegal gun crime to deal with legal gun owners who will have their firearms taken away?
I would suspect they will. You know, you are adding an added
Thank you.
job to police officers across Canada.
Thank you. At our last meeting, we heard from the Canadian Mounted Shooters Association, who said that their sport, which uses primarily single-action revolvers, will be destroyed because of this handgun freeze. In your experience, are single-action or even double-action revolvers a weapon of choice by criminals or a firearm of choice by criminals?
I'm not a gun guy, so you know you would have to actually speak to an expert about that and analyzing the gun crime in Canada. So it's not really for me to answer.
Okay, maybe to the CACP. Are revolvers, like single-action revolvers, are those the handguns that you're primarily worried about that criminals are using?
I would say not primarily. You know, the reality is criminals that are going to use a firearm in the commission of an offense are going to grab and use anything they can, which is why even replica firearms can be a challenge in the commission of an offense. But, you know, if you're looking at the type of handguns that are being used, I would say it's predominantly more mainstream handguns.
So not your revolvers. Now, under this handgun freeze, I've been made aware by some stakeholders that the reproduction of firearms that were designed before 1898, including a flintlock pistol here, as you can see, I'm sure the witnesses can see, a muzzle-loaded flintlock pistol using black powder could also be banned under C-21. Is it your experience as law enforcement
Point of order,
professionals
Mr. Chair?
that these are being used on the streets?
Mr.
Just wanted to confirm, and this is just for my own personal knowledge, are we allowed to use props in committee?
I don't think there's a rule on that. We can't use props in the House, but we often have witnesses distribute samples of various things and so forth. So I think it's in order. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
5 seconds. So the question to the law enforcement, is it your experience that these firearms are being used on the streets in the commission of crimes?
I would say it would be rare.
Any cases that you can think of?
None that I can think of off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. Again, I think criminals will use anything that, you know, in the commission of an offense would replicate. I think about robberies that happen sometimes with simply a barrel of a gun, not a complete firearm, maybe wrapped in a blanket. And so the store owner doesn't know what it is they're facing.
When you're taking into account risk here, that kind of firearm that I just showed you, you would say is like very low to almost no risk.
I don't think I would say that.
Low risk?
Well, what I'm saying is that any firearm presented to someone, if it's used for a robbery, intimidation, or threatening, presents a risk to that person. It may not mean that they're going to use it to shoot that person, but we have retaliation crime happening all the time where a replica firearm was used in the initial instance, and then the follow-up is a real firearm. So I think it does pose a form of risk.
Interesting. Thank you. Back to the National Police Federation. We heard recently that your members need to practice at private ranges in order to maintain proficiency. We also heard that handgun owners' mandatory membership dues are critical to the financial sustainability of these ranges, and that they will close if C-21 should pass. How will shutting down of these private ranges impact your members' ability to train?
Well, it's going to place a greater responsibility on the RCMP to expand their training capacity. And ultimately, that's going to put us in a position of asking the RCMP to, across Canada, have government approved or RCMP approved training facilities. So there is that component to it versus just being able to use the local shooting range.
And my final line of questioning, we've had a number of witnesses from across the political spectrum on this debate that have drawn a lot of concerns about the so-called red flag laws in this legislation. We had a chief of police who suggested that if people go to the court system instead of calling 911, that they could be putting themselves in more danger. Do you think that these red flag laws are necessary? Aren't police already responding to victims' calls when firearms are present?
Yes, police are responding and they do take firearm calls very seriously. However, I think from our membership's perspective, anything that can be done to improve the safety of victims of crime is a good thing. Now, is a red flag, yellow flag, green flag the system? I don't know, but I think it's a great initiative and a great start.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We'll go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed. Mr. Nur Mohammed, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of you for appearing and indeed for all you do in helping to keep Canadians safe. I'd like to start my questions with Mr. Bray. Sir, Chief Bray, you, when you were talking, mentioned the concerns related to ghost guns and components. One of the concerns, one of the opportunities I think we have in this legislation is to really think about how we address component parts, whether it's slide assemblies, barrels, or slides, trigger assemblies, or barrels, and regulating them to make sure people can't make their own weapons at home. You know, in hearing from the VPD, Vancouver Police Department, and others, this is a major concern, certainly in my community, in the Lower Mainland, and I guess across the country. What are your views on what we should be doing to address this in Bill C-21? And do you think we should be spending a little bit of time and effort on ensuring that the issue of ghost guns and components, particularly the regulation of components and their importation, should be included? What are your views on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that is an important part of this discussion. Ultimately, we too here in the prairies deal with 3D printing and manufacturing of firearms. So the reality is that people can print the predominant pieces of the firearm. They can order online parts of a firearm, which by themselves as just a part, whether it's a trigger or a different component of the firearm, they're not illegal to purchase, and they don't really signal any sort of a warning sign if someone is bringing those types of things in through the mail or through other forms. And so the ability to put together a firearm like that is something that we're seeing more and more. We've had a couple of fairly large projects here in Saskatchewan that we've done, and we've been able to take those types of firearms off the streets. So I think they're becoming more and more of an issue, and I absolutely think there is room for us to do some sort of legislative work to restrict the ability for this to happen or to regulate the ability where it can.
And what type of restrictions or regulation would make life easier for police who are dealing with this, you know, every single day, and who are seeing more and more of these ghost guns in the commission of crimes?
Well, you know, I think there's probably a lot, and that would likely need a little bit of exploration to understand. I think right now, if I order a firing pin to come out of Germany, there's no tracking of that. There's no requirements for that to be regulated in any way. Whereas if I go to buy a firearm or something, or ammunition in most cases, there's a need to produce some sort of you know, a license that shows that I can do that. So again, we're finding people. We had a recent case in Saskatchewan where a person was fairly sophisticated in their ability to not only produce a firearm predominantly made from a 3D printer, but one that would fire 40 or 50 times while it holds the integrity of the firearm, which you only need it to be able to fire once for it to be fatal and used in a homicide. So, you know, I think if we can somehow work on importation of parts, and perhaps there's some other things, I don't know what best practices exist in other countries, but I think something, again, it would be an exploratory piece of work to look into that.
But just to confirm, if we were to find ways to include, you know, possession, sale, importation of these types of parts that are used to manufacture ghost guns, that you would be supportive?
Very supportive.
Fantastic. The other, I wanted to just turn now, with I think what limited time I have, to something that you mentioned earlier, which was this whole question of replica firearms, like airsoft guns, that are made to look like real weapons. One of the questions that I had asked the industry, and others on this committee had asked industry, was to think about ways in which their weapons would, or their toys, guns, or whatever we want to call them, don't make it so that people get shot. Don't make it so that law enforcement has to react as though they are, you know, live round weapons that can kill people. How important is it for you in policing to make sure that guns that look like that toys that look like real guns are off the streets? And what would you say to the industry when they are manufacturing these types of things that end up getting people killed? What would you say to the industry that they should do in order to save their industry from being shut down?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've had meetings and direct conversations with people in that industry on an international basis. The reality is that even a gun that looks like a toy gun, if it's got the orange cap on the end of it, or if it's a completely different color, if it looks like a Nerf gun, there are ways that they can be converted to be real. So there's no perfect solution to this, I understand. But having guns that look exactly like, for example, a Glock, which is the gun that we carry at the Regina Police Service, when that is brought out and used in the commission of an offense, most time even police officers in the heat of the moment can't determine whether that firearm is real or not. So it does pose an absolute threat. Oftentimes victims that are facing the barrel of one of those replica firearms, they have the reaction as if it is real. And as I mentioned earlier, often what we're seeing is follow-up consequences. That initial threat, a house is rushed, some people are robbed in a house, and what was present was a replica firearm. And a week later, we have a homicide because of a retaliation that happened as a result of that initial incident. So it poses threats at all levels. And I think the more we can stray from having replicas look exactly like a real firearm, it would be a better step for community safety.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Mohammed. On y va maintenant.
Now we go to Ms. Michaud. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Brochet, for accepting our invitation to appear before our committee. So you mentioned in your opening remarks that, well, you welcome certain elements of C-21, the increase of the maximum sentence for firearm trafficking, but you mentioned that you have certain question marks, if you will, when it comes to the minimal compulsory sentences for crimes committed by firearm. We can talk about the example of William Renville, a Quebecer. You probably know his story. He had someone of 25 years of age, and he had 250 parts trafficked through the border. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but less than a year after, he was half free. So this goes to show that people who are involved in firearms smuggling or trafficking aren't always hardened criminals. Someone with a criminal record, it might be their first time committing a crime or getting caught at least. So it is very rare that they would be receiving the maximum sentence. So in your experience, do you see or do you know of smugglers who have really received significant sentences, and this increase in maximum sentence, will it have a positive impact in your opinion? Well, the increase in the maximum sentence, I think, will still be dealing with exceptional cases. People who have been accused and convicted multiple times of smuggling, but it does send a message nonetheless. When it comes to Bill C-5, I already appeared before another parliamentary committee, so we understand the basis of this bill. We focus a lot on racialized communities, indigenous communities. We get the point, but all across Canada, we are faced with concerning situations due to firearm use by street gangs or organized crime groups, and that is very concerning for the population. I am the police services director for the city of Laval, and suspects are getting younger and younger. And when I'm out there in the field, citizens have approached me multiple times mentioning that they are thinking of moving to a new neighborhood. So I think the idea of getting rid of the minimum compulsory sentences sends out a very bad message. And we do not agree with this idea of getting rid of these minimum compulsory sentences. So for firearms, it should be kept, but according to certain criteria, and this is something done in many countries, judges might have some flexibility to use an exception clause and not implement these sentences. Of course, it's a process. You can arrest people, you can seize items or weapons, but if those people are liberated very quickly, and there's a good chance that they will go back to offending again. And this sends a message to other criminals and to the general population, a message of weakness, an appearance that we're not taking these cases seriously. Thank you. Very interesting indeed. You talked about young people and shootings in the city, and I know that you are also part of efforts to consult with different stakeholders. So have you heard about other solutions that can help overcome this issue? Because C-21 will not solve the problem of illegal firearms smuggling, and for the most part, these illegal arms that end up in the hands of the young people or street gangs or organized crime groups in Montreal or other parts of the country. These are illegal firearms that they detain, that they possess. So when it comes to the border and cooperation with other police services, the CBSA, what do you think about other potential solutions that the government can implement? Well, if we're talking about the borders, there should be mixed teams that would dig deeper in terms of investigating these cases of trafficking, because otherwise we will always have an abundance of firearms. We are indeed part of this consultation group, and we talked about subsidies from the federal government. Security communities, I think, was a term that came up. For instance, the city of Laval has a subsidy of about $4 million to help them implement prevention strategies. Our association thinks that, yes, over the short term, when it comes to investigation, visibility, it might help, but there's an underlying problem. Mr. Sauvé talked about this. The offenders are getting younger and younger, so it's not normal for a 16-year-old to end up with a firearm. So it's not a policing problem, it's a society problem when that happens. So the financing is good. We might be open to additional financing, but what you need is an integrated strategy with healthcare partners, municipalities, police services, and social and community organizations to come up with a fundamental policy. A bit like what was implemented in Toronto with the project was Safe TO, to have longer-term solutions. Thank you.
Please.
Much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for helping guide our committee through its study of Bill C-21. Chief Bray, I'd like to start with you. You made comments with regards to the red flag laws, and I know the statement on the CACP website states that you do support the red flag law and its goal to reduce gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and self-harm by limiting access to firearms by those who pose a risk of harm to themselves or others. We've had a lot of testimony on the proposed red flag law, and there are a lot of groups who have problems with the sections in C-21. They are worried that too much of an onus is being placed on a potential victim to go through a lengthy court process when it's preferable to go through the police. So I guess my question to you is, are there gaps in our current system that justify us adding this to the criminal code? In other words, in what instance is it preferable for someone to go through the courts to make an emergency prohibition order against someone rather than going through the police?
Yeah, well, I think it's an important balance, and I appreciate the question. I think about in Saskatchewan and many provinces, we have the ability for families to help youth that are having problems with alcohol. So we have something in Saskatchewan called a youth detox warrant, and it's where family goes proactively to the court and says, one of my children or a child that I'm in care of is having a problem with some sort of a substance, and they make application for them to be taken in for treatment. So it's a preventative measure rather than waiting for that child to be engaged in crime and our officers to deal with them, and on the back end try and get them some help through the courts. So I view the red flag law very similar to that. It by no means is a substitute for the need for immediate action, and I know I've had conversations where there's been concerns that people will feel they have to go through this lengthy administrative process and potentially are putting themselves at risk. If there's immediate risk, you should call the police. There's no question about it. But if there's a way that we don't have to wait for something to happen in order for police to act to restrict the access to firearms, if we can do that in a positive way up front, in a safe and secure environment, then I think it's just another tool in the toolkit.
Okay, I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. Moving on to the handgun freeze, you did say that the CACP, you're in favor of a national approach to managing the issue of handguns in Canada. You believe that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing these types of firearms. But what struck me in the second part of your statement is you said, while allowing existing law-abiding handgun owners to practice their sport. Now, I know to be authorized to have a restricted firearm, such as a handgun, you do have to have proof that you practice or compete at an approved shooting club or range. There are exemptions carved out in C-21 for Olympic level and Paralympic level shooters, and other shooting disciplines have raised concerns that they might be edged out because of how C-21 is currently written. So the CACP, you have said that you want existing law-abiding handgunners owners to be able to practice their sport. Do you believe that a middle ground to this would be to require people in those other disciplines to provide more proof that they are actively engaged in their sport? I mean, in other words, providing actual proof that they have a demonstrated need to own the handgun.
Yeah, short answer to that question is yes. I think at the end of the day, the notion of firearms itself is a very divisive issue in Canada. And I think you probably see even in some of the CACP communication that it's a bit of a balance there, because we recognize that there are people that is a sport they're engaged in. And I think, talking about Olympic or international competition is a good example of that. I'm going to stick by a statement I've said, I feel like 200 times in the last year and a half. Law-abiding firearm owners and possessors are usually not the problem. Predominantly, they are not the ones that are causing the issue. The issue is people that are criminals or using them for a criminal purpose and aren't really willing to follow the law in the first place. So I think anything that you can do in legislation that allows for exemptions when there's some legislative requirements that ensure added measures of safety are being followed, I think that's a positive thing.
So from a policing perspective, making sure there are exemptions for other shooting disciplines, but also adding more stringent requirements to demonstrate they are actively involved in that sport and have a demonstrated need for the handgun. That's correct? I'm interpreting you right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think that's a good balance.
Okay, thank you for that. With regards to airsoft, I appreciate the previous testimony you've given in response to other questions. I think there's a realization around this committee table that perhaps the way C-21 is currently written could be amended, but you would agree with trying to put in requirements that distinguish it ultimately from the appearance of a real handgun, or sorry, a real firearm. Any measures that we can put into the legislation that specify that to give police services more peace of mind when responding to calls.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I think that takes me to the end.
So that ends our first round. Before we go into our second round, I'll just observe that I've been in conversation with the clerk regarding the matter of Mr. Schiffke's point of order on props. Generally speaking, we need to follow the procedures of the House, which disallows props in the House, and therefore we need to not use props here as well. So thank you, Mr. Schiffke, and I stand corrected, so thank you. So we'll start our second round. We won't have time to do a full second round. As usual, we're kind of constrained by time, so we will do one question slot per party, and we will start with Mr. Motz. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. Nice to see you again, Mr. Sauvé and Chief Bray. It's been a while. It's interesting how different police officials from across the country have varying perspectives, and I think, Chief Bray, you mentioned that there's even within the CACP, there's a wide range of perspectives on application of firearm legislation, whether it be C-21, the OIC, and others from the previous iteration of C-21 in the previous Parliament. My question is simple. Do criminals follow the law?
Is that question for me, sir?
All of them. I mean, yeah, for sure.
Sure.
I'll save you the time. We know criminals don't follow the law. You kind of touched on it a bit. So, does having laws that target law-abiding firearm owners predominantly, as has been said by both of you in this particular testimony, does that really improve public safety to the degree that we need?
So what I will say to that, thank you for that question, is that, Canada has some very good, strong firearm-related laws and regulations. And when you compare us to many other countries, including the one to the south of us, they pale in comparison to what we have. So, we do a good job now in terms of trying to restrict firearm and access to firearms to those that are licensed and legally able to possess them. But I think we have to focus and consider the fact that law-abiding firearm owners are predominantly not the problem we have when we talk about this sharp increase in firearm-related crime. It's criminals.
Yes, thank you for that. Mr. Sauvé, a couple questions to you. I appreciated some of the comments you made with regards to that C-21 is focused incorrectly, and I'm paraphrasing what you said. And also the comments that Mr. Lloyd was getting to with respect to Mr. Bray will talk about the municipal aspect, but when you're talking about the confiscation of firearms, and the government wants to call it a buyback program, the impact of that on resources, and then if the government's expecting law enforcement to go and gather up these firearms, the impact on public safety when those resources are going to be deployed in doing this rather than responding to public safety issues on the street. So, Mr. Sauvé, first, how do you see if the RCMP are required to confiscate firearms, that impact on your frontline officers, your ability to respond to hot calls, 911s, for example, and public safety?
Thank you, and obviously a good question, and I think it's a discussion point that this legislation overlooks. And we have said on a number of occasions that police services in Canada, including the RCMP, are operating at minimal levels already. We're having challenges recruiting, we're having challenges retaining, we're having challenges attracting to the law enforcement profession. So as every time that we increase the mandate of police officers on the street, there has to be something that gives. And is that going to mean that we don't respond to that mental health call, the person in crisis in the middle of the street, because police officers are now tied up going to pick up guns that are no longer legal to possess? So there is an impact. And in the end, do we leave it to, as Chief Bray said, another agency that may implement? That isn't spoken to in the legislation, isn't spoken to within the buyback program. So it's going to fall to the cops of the street, the members of the RCMP. Without sustained resources, something has to fall off the plate.
I agree. I think what we've seen with a lot of this current government's legislation, certainly firearm related, that the devil's in the details, and there's not specific details to deal with this. Mr. Bray, or Chief Bray, I think you would agree that the resources in Regina and municipal agencies from across the country are in a similar boat to the RCMP, and the confiscation process is going to be problematic on your already overloaded calls for service. Yes or no?
Yeah. I absolutely do agree. And can I add one quick thing? I know you're short on time. Here's my other worry is if we continue to prioritize calls, meaning we'll go to those mental health emergencies, we'll go to the assaults in progress, and this administrative work falls lower on the priority scale, I worry about the fact that that can have on law-abiding gun owners becoming criminals once the amnesty period is closed. So if it's not given a high enough priority, then I think it will have a counter effect and it will cause us problems on the back end as well.
Exactly, and that's the problem with this
thank you, Mr.
legislation,
Motz.
that it C-21 criminalizes people who aren't criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. We go now to Ms. DeMoff. Ms. DeMoff, go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to start with a comment that if gun ownership actually enhanced public safety, then the United States would be the safest country in the world. So, and we know that's simply not the case. Chief Bray, you were talking about how the red flag, yellow flag is just one tool in the toolbox. And I know that's the way our government looks at it, that it's not the solution for gender-based violence or people who are contemplating suicide. It's one tool. And in that legislation, it was changed so that people could, a woman's shelter, for example, could go to court on behalf of a woman and she could remain anonymous. If Halton Police got a call from Halton Women's Place, are they able to respond, or does it have to be the actual woman that calls the police?
Oh, they would definitely be able to respond to that.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know in speaking with Dr. Alan Drummond, who's an emergency room doc, he said that when there's an imminent danger, it's easy for him to respond, in particular around suicide. But it's when there's a question about the potential, he's got concerns. I've heard this from women's organizations where it's been coercive control, for example, and someone is threatening to shoot the companion animals like dogs. So the woman hasn't been shot, she hasn't been punched, but it's being used under coercive control, and it's much more difficult. And I would expect that would be more difficult for police officers to respond to as well.
Yeah, for sure. That is a guaranteed, it's a factor in it, which is why when you've got advocates and others that are helping people that find themselves in that domestic situation, there's a very strong willingness on the part of law enforcement and the justice system in general to use those advocates and use their influence in trying to enhance safety.
I have some really specific questions around airsoft because they appeared here, and I know you have testified that you would like to see them not look at all like real guns. They have suggested that they would support provisions that would require a purchase to be restricted to individuals 18 plus, and also around safe storage and safe transfer, and requiring a license to purchase an airsoft gun. Do you see that as being a solution in terms of police response?
I would call it steps in the right direction. And, I think that's what you heard us talk about when we talked about replica firearms. Right now, they look exactly like firearms. Anyone can walk in and purchase them. There's no recording of information. There's no requirements of age. There's nothing that you have to be able to prove. So I think any steps we can take in the direction that restrict access to them, that allow us to try and do everything we can to make it safe. I still do think that the likeness issue is a big problem. And, I say that, and I don't want to spend more time on it, but you can convert anything into a firearm. A ballpoint pen can be made into a firearm. So I recognize just because it maybe looks purple and more like a Nerf gun doesn't mean it's not a real gun, because it can be converted. But I think it's less likely that would happen than the counter.
Well, and I was speaking with my police chief here in Halton, and he brought up the opposite point, which I hadn't thought of, that a real gun, if it was only a color issue, a real gun could be made to look like a replica.
That's a great.
Monsieur Brochet, I wonder if you wanted to add anything on the airsoft. What are your thoughts in terms of those requirements versus actually changing the gun itself?
I really agree with Chief Bray. It is an important question regularly when we're in the field intervening in situations, high-risk situations. We end up realizing that the person had a replica gun or an airsoft gun. So it is very risky for police officers who end up answering those calls, and this has impacts on the victims as well. So this is another good step in the right direction. So there should be a better control of these types of arms.
30 seconds left. Chief Bray, maybe I'll ask you, do you think the current penalties for trafficking in ghost guns are sufficient?
I don't. I think, especially in the area of ghost guns, we're deficient.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. We go now to Madame Michaud. 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Michaud, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Chief Bray. As you know, the government in May 2021 introduced a bill to ban assault-style weapons, and they also introduced a buyback program for these weapons. So I heard through the grapevine, let's say, in the hallways of the parliament, the reason it took the government so long to introduce this program was that they had no idea how to introduce it and what organization to give this to as a responsibility. So I think in your opening remarks, you were also saying that it maybe shouldn't be up to the police services to shoulder this responsibility, because in the collective imagination, if you will, firearm owners of these types, well, we have the impression that the police will come knocking their doors and kicking their doors and coming in to really seize these firearms. But is it really going to be police services that will proceed with this responsibility or others? So what would you want to add on this particular point? What would be the solution you would be picking if you were in government right now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And very much, I think it's the importance is in the details of how this is going to be rolled out. Police services, and Mr. Sauvé talked about this, police services, police officers will follow and enforce the law. The buyback program is an administrative process, and at the end of the amnesty period, the law becomes the law, and police officers will be forced, will be, involved in that process to enforce the law at that time. So in this administrative process, I think there's a lot of ways, and the CACP is advocating for alternate ways to find these firearms to be submitted for buyback, for the buyback program, rather than using police resources. Could they be used through some sort of a courier or a mail system? Could there be another organization that could go out there and collect these firearms as they're being turned in? But through the administrative part of this process, it's a massive amount of work, and our frontline officers, doesn't matter where you're talking in Canada, are strapped. They're being overstretched. Their community's expectations are much higher than what our officers are able to deliver. And sadly, we are delivering that work, but it's at the expense of our officers because of the drain on them and their mental health. And so I think this added process needs to be diverted somewhere else rather than using police resources if at all possible.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you.
We go to Mr. McGregor, please, 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I think I'll turn for this question to Mr. Sauvé, and it will again be on the subject of the red flag laws. I also want to invite your perspective, because we've heard the CACP and Chief Bray talk about it being another avenue, and we're trying to balance that with the testimony we've heard from several groups. We've also had letters and submissions who feel that it's very troubling to place the onus on someone who might be at risk of victimization of firearms or other dangerous devices in the homes to go through a lengthy court process. I understand that the police in emergency situations would like to underline that you should always call the police if you believe someone's life is in danger, especially with respect to a firearm. But if you look at the provisions in C-21 creating this new system where we can go through a court system where someone can remain anonymous, are there instances in your view where that court system is justified? Like, do you support having this additional avenue for people?
Thank you. I think anything we can do in Canada to address intimate partner violence and the threats thereof is a good thing. Challenges that we've identified, as I mentioned, I don't think C21 goes far enough, and I don't think we're looking at the downstream activities of it. For example, we've spoken already about the overburdened policing system and the expectations of the community and added mandates added to police officers. Is this going to create an extra burden in our overburdened already court system? We are seeing a number of provinces where there are not enough Crown prosecutors, there's not enough judges, there's not enough trial space. So even if we end up in a court proceeding for red flag, yellow flag, however that might look, is it going to be addressed in a timely manner? And if it's not addressed in a timely manner, is that person continually put at risk? So the downstream impacts of this are something that we need to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. That concludes this panel. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for sharing your time with us today and your expertise and to help us with our study on this bill. I will now suspend for a couple of minutes as we bring in the next panel. I call this meeting back to order. So with us for this panel by video conference in the second hour, we have, as individuals, we have Monsieur André Gélinas, Detective Sergeant retired, Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal. And also as an individual, we have Monsieur Stéphane Wall, Supervisor retired, Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Bienvenue à vous deux. J'invite Monsieur.
I'd like to welcome our witnesses, and I would like to now invite Mr. Gélinas to proceed with his presentation of the 5 minutes, please. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I am André Gélinas. I am a retired Detective Sergeant with the Intelligence Division of the Montreal Police Department. I have been asked to appear before you today to share my expertise on various aspects of Bill C-21. Before addressing the subjects that interest us, I would like to clarify a few points. My presence here is apolitical and non-partisan. For the past 2 years, I've been a police news analyst for various media, both television, print, and radio. I am not a member of any lobby or pressure group, and during the last year, I have met with various members of the federal parliament to provide my expertise and support for some of their initiatives and projects. I have met with federal parliamentarians of all parties. Bill C-21, in my humble opinion, is a bill that misses the very noble objective of increasing the safety of our fellow citizens by ensuring effective, judicious gun control, which is based on a pragmatic analysis of the situation. This bill suggests that a freeze on the sale and import of legal handguns for target shooting to permit holders will have a significant impact on the deteriorating security situation in our country's major cities. Furthermore, the public announcement of the project in Montreal North, a city particularly affected by street gangs, implies that there's a casual link between the violence in this neighborhood and legal handguns, legally acquired and used for safe and highly supervised sporting activities. This statement is false and the result of lobbying based on an emotional and ideological analysis, certainly not on facts observable by police officers on the ground. It is important for you as parliamentarians to understand this situation will certainly not have the desired or announced effect. The handguns that are used by criminals and seized by police forces in shootings and other crimes by street gangs, outlaw motorcycle gangs, and the Italian mafia are overwhelming the illegally acquired and originate from the United States, where the sale is virtually unrestricted by constitutional right. Only a significant and real tightening of the border and the restoration of police enforcement in some indigenous territories can give us hope for any improvement. This is the only way that the police will ever be able to get a handle on the illegal supply and the demand for it, which is growing daily. At present, if these measures are not quickly implemented, we will never be able to control the situation, and there will always be more coming in than we will be able to catch. It's like trying to empty the St. Lawrence River with a bucket. The project targets legal guns that are used by citizens who meet high standards of selection and training imposed by the government and under the supervision of police forces, when we know full well that it is the illegal handguns that are the real problem. No serious criminal is interested in obtaining a legal, traceable handgun. It is simply not in their interest. So we want to solve the problem of shootings, but we're not targeting the right weapons. The bill will have absolutely no impact whatsoever, and the situation will remain much the same or deteriorate if pragmatic solutions based on an adequate analysis of the situation are not adopted. In addition, flagging measures are being introduced to ensure that gun owners are monitored. This is excellent and highly desirable, but any police officer with even the slightest operational experience knows that this has been going on for decades. Reporting has always been there, as have preventive seizures and license suspensions. In 1998, as a young constable, I preventively seized firearms during domestic violence interventions. So there is nothing new in this bill, and we're not reinventing the way things are done. So as we say in English, nothing new under the sun. It is also proposed to create a new criminal offense for someone who modifies a magazine to make it exceed the legal capacity. This offense is unnecessary as the mere possession of a high-capacity magazine is already punishable under the criminal code. There are no criminals who specialize in modifying magazines. Users do it themselves, and this is a very simple modification. So this offense is a solution to a non-existent problem. It is also proposed to increase the maximum sentence from 10 to 14 years for individuals found guilty of trafficking firearms. While at first glance this may seem laudable, there have been no cases that have received the current maximum sentence of 10 years for this offense. This measure will have no real impact. Another good example of a measure that will be ineffective and have no effect. It is also proposed to allow for a wiretap warrant for new firearm possession offenses under sections 92 and 95 of the Criminal Code. Again, a good idea with no real effect. This type of investigation is always undertaken because the weapons in question are related to other criminal offenses that already allow for judicial authorization to wiretap. And finally, I also point out the negative effects on shooting clubs and sport shooters. Jobs will be lost and there will be no possibility of succession for this sport. Thank you very much, and I am ready to answer your questions. Thank you, sir. We're now going to Mr. Wall for their opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, please. Mr. Chair, distinguished parliamentarians, I am a retired SPVM supervisor, and I work with the media and elected officials to explain the police profession and the reality of the field. I'm a founding member of the Community of Citizens in Action Against Violent Criminals, the CCACV, which proposed 16 actions on January 26 to the various levels of government, including the federal government. You have just heard from another founding member, Mr. Andrei Jelina. Ms. Annie Samson, former Vice President of the VDM Executive Committee, completes our trio. Victims of violent crime and their loved ones are our inspiration. We believe that in Canada, the rights and freedoms of victims and their loved ones to life, health, and safety should take priority over the rights and freedoms of violent criminals. We believe that the responsible legislator must also adopt laws and regulations that target violent criminals, including members of street gangs and organized crime, who use illegal firearms to carry out their shootings from moving vehicles. We believe that a legislator who is complacent about the serious crimes of criminals in possession of weapons who discharge or hold up a firearm, they can be assured that there will be different major social impacts. First of all, an increase in the sense of impunity that street gang members are already bragging about on social media and in their videos propagating gangster rap culture. Secondly, a dramatic increase in victims, already overrepresented according to Statistics Canada in 2021, and who come from the same community backgrounds as the violent criminals, including Black people, who represent 49% of homicide victims in 2021, and Indigenous people who have a homicide rate that is 6 times higher than non-Indigenous people in 2021. Bill C-21 is not aimed at the right target. It's a cosmetic measure that will have no impact on reducing the number of shootings committed by violent criminals who almost always use illegal guns. Instead of hitting the right nail on the head, which is the illegal trafficking of guns across the border and through Indigenous reserves, we are hitting another nail on the head that will not change anything. We're attacking legitimate licensed gun owners who own firearms for hunting or sport shooting. Let's take a look at some of the measures proposed by the legislator to counter firearms trafficking. 1. Increase the maximum prison sentence from 10 to 14 years for firearms-related offenses, including trafficking and other offenses. The reality is that courts almost never give the 10-year sentence, so why would they suddenly give 14 years? Young William Rainville was arrested in Dundee with 250 polymer AT gun frames and got 5 years and was released a year later. Secondly, prohibiting businesses from promoting gun violence in sales or marketing. The reality is that how about banning street gang members from promoting gun violence on their social networks, where they threaten their enemies with guns, display their judicial impunity, their invincibility, their money, and their pimped victims. So let's do a comparison. Continuing with the same logic as C-21, we could say that when it comes to the problem of drinking and driving, which causes many deaths by road criminals, the legislator's solution would be to ban cars from everyone, even licensed law-abiding motorists. So the inconsistency between the problem and the solution can be easily seen. what about the percentages of handguns used in crime that originates in Canada? In 2021, 10% of guns used in crime were from Canada. Of the remaining 90%, 45% came from the USA, and 23% of these were untraceable, and 22% were ghost guns. And 9 out of 10 crimes were therefore caused by illegal handguns. In 2022, so far, 16% of weapons used are from Canada. So 8.4 out of 10 crimes are caused by illegal handguns. How could the legislature tackle illegal guns? By surveillance of the border, and especially around the Kanawaki Reserve, by adding cameras, drones, electronic surveillance, high-speed boats, by adding patrols and checkpoints by the CBSA, RCMP, SQ, and the OPP, increasing the number of vehicle inspections on the border, and by increasing the number of inspections of all motor vehicles leaving Indigenous reserves by land, sea, or air, and by having a procedure that requires the CBSA to lay criminal charges for each seizure. Right now, prosecutions are very rare. Also by increasing the cooperation of the RCMP with U.S. authorities in investigations, and finally, better funding the development of informants and criminal sources living near borders and on Indigenous reserves. So in conclusion, the legislator must aim the right target and not licensed sports shooters or hunters. In addition to hunters, the legislator should, at the very least, exempt sports shooters who train regularly, who are registered in a recognized shooting club, and who take part in at least one competition per year in order to keep their skills. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Dancho. Ms. Dancho, go ahead. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup à Mr. Wall et Mr. Jalina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wall and Mr. Jelina, for sharing your expertise in your respective fields. I have multiple questions to both of you. So since 2015, we have seen a 32% increase in violent gun crime across the country, but we know that firearms used to commit crimes, for the most part, are firearms that are illegally obtained. So Bill C-21, will it really tackle the problem of violent crime that is going up in our communities? And what are some measures that can really address this challenge of violent crime? I will go ahead and answer your question, Ms. Dancho, if you allow me. So in your preamble, you are right. The Bill C-21 will not solve anything at all. As my colleague was saying, Mr. Wall was saying, the percentage of handguns originating from Canada is infinitely smaller than handguns coming through other borders. So there's a complete disproportionality there. And the solutions are very clear. We have to work on the border. We have to work on certain territories where Canadian police services do not have the right to intervene. They're not politically authorized. And in these areas, many handguns originate from these areas. And when you look at police data, illegal handguns are very present in cities such as Montreal and Toronto. So these two provinces, the common denominator they have when it comes to their geography is that they have the Akwesasne Reserve, which borders the U.S. as well, and U.S., of course, is the global center for weapons production. So we are a bit of a victim of the situation, and the border is not guarded in the sense that we are not able to stop the flow of arms. So this would be a way of helping with this problem. Thank you very much. You were saying that 90% of the firearms are illegally of the illegal firearms. 90% come from the U.S. Are these illegal weapons that are seized traced? And what would you like to say about ghost guns? Well, from a technical point of view, when a firearm is seized by the police, if there's a serial number on it, it takes 15 seconds to know if it originates from Canada. If it's not registered in Canada, because we have to remind you that handguns have been registered since the 30s in Canada, in that case, we can communicate with our U.S. partners and provide them with the serial number. The serial number will take us to a person in the U.S. who purchased the firearm from an authorized retailer, an FFA, Federal Firearms Licensee. And we can get this information. But the problem is that right now there is no crime that's committed in the U.S. This person acquired the gun legally, and this can be done by anyone without any checks, because that's the law in the U.S. So that's how we get that information. When it comes to PMFs, privately made firearms, ghost guns, these do not have serial numbers. But we can be really sure in most cases that they're coming from the U.S. as well. The majority of these firearms have the chassis, if you will, the frame of the gun is manufactured by this company called Polymer 80. And the sale of these products is illegal in Canada. So these ghost guns that have a Polymer 80 frame, you can be sure that it's also coming from the U.S. So once again, this is another way of knowing that the large majority of firearms are coming from the U.S. Thank you very much. With Bill C-21, the Liberals are getting rid of minimum compulsory sentences for crimes committed with a firearm and introduce house detention for criminals. So what would you say about these provisions contained in Bill C-5, and how will it impact violent crime in the country? Well, Bill C-5 unfortunately undermines our judicial system because it goes to bolster the arrogance of criminal groups who are, of course, following what's happening. They are advised by lawyers in certain cases, and they know in certain cases there won't be any compulsory minimum sentences. So the dissuasion component is gone. And criminals are following developments. They are following C-21, and they realize that people who have permits are targeted by this bill. So the message this bill sends to criminals is that the government is not going after the root cause of the problem, is intending to get rid of minimum compulsory sentences. So this doesn't really help to solve the problem. Thank you very much.
We go now to Mr. Shifke. 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jelena, Mr. Wall, I would like to start off by thanking you for your service for our families and our communities. I would like to focus on ghost guns. We know that the proliferation of ghost guns has skyrocketed with 3D printers and the accessibility of parts that are sold online. So we are looking for solutions in Bill C-21 or through regulation. So my first question to you, Mr. Jelena, Mr. Wall, is the following. Would you be in favor of regulating the sale and the import of weapons, firearm parts and pieces that go into manufacturing ghost guns? Yes, absolutely. It's an aberration that today someone, if they have the technical knowledge, go ahead and print a 3D firearm frame illegally. They can get the magazine, the barrel, the firing pin, so all the parts and pieces that they can put into a 3D printed gun frame. If you really wanted to achieve an outcome or make a difference, at the very least, the possession and acquisition license should come into play. There is no sports shooter or hunter who would be against this type of a measure because it's just logical. It is unacceptable that someone who doesn't have a PAL, a possession and acquisition license, not a sports shooter, not a hunter, can go ahead and get magazines and firearm parts. It makes no sense. So it is really obvious, but we really don't understand how this is not tackled in C-21. Thank you, Mr. Gélinas. Mr. Wall? So my second question, Mr. Gélinas, I think you already answered, but would you be in favor of regulating the number of these parts that an authorized firearm holder can import, and also the sale of these parts, should it be limited to people with a license? Mr. Wall, if you want to go ahead and answer the question. The answer is the same as the one shared by Mr. Gélinas. It is a must. We have to make sure that this aspect is tackled in the bill. We cannot really neglect this issue. Having a license gives certain privileges, but this is something we should not overlook. So the answer is yes. Okay, thank you. I also want to talk about airsoft guns. Numbers are going up, skyrocketing. So these resemble real firearms. The likeness is significant. So in Vaudreuil-Soulanges, in my riding, there are interested parties who want to find a solution, but they think a ban is just going too far. So regulating airsoft guns the same way firearms are regulated at the moment might be a solution. So my first question is, would you be in favor of limiting the sale of airsoft weapons to people 18 and older? My first question. Yes. Absolutely, you are right. That will be a solution. That will be a good start, because it is just not normal that young adolescents can go out there and get airsoft guns. These airsoft guns are also found or seized by police officers from street gangs. The appearance of these arms can lead to confusion with real arms, and as previous speakers mentioned, this might lead a police officer to open fire. Age has to be a criterion, and I wouldn't be against the idea that users of airsoft guns adult users of these guns should also get a firearm license. Mr. Gélinas, you just answered my second question, so thank you. Mr. Wall? Absolutely. Yes, I share the opinion expressed by my colleague. As someone who's been on the field for a long time, yes, you can sometimes get calls and intercept situations or where you come across individuals who possess airsoft guns. And for patrolling teams of officers, this might be a common occurrence. Over the past year, we haven't had so many documented cases where police officers had to neutralize a person with an airsoft gun, but it has happened in the past. So to avoid these situations, and sometimes you have a 16-year-old with an airsoft gun who just wants to get rid of it in front of police officers without really provoking them, but it all boils down to the analysis in the heat of the action, and it resembles real guns. So this might lead to accidents. So we have to be in a position to avoid these situations. And we were talking also about converting these into real guns. Now, can you produce airsoft guns that would be really different and will not resemble real firearms? Well, this would require a big change in terms of the production of these. And for toy guns, even a toy gun then can be altered or modified by a youngster. They can paint it black. So the bill has to have more teeth on when it comes to this about airsoft guns and their use cases, particular use cases. Thank you very much.
On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for accepting our invitation to appear before our committee. We really appreciate your expertise, and you have similar positions, very clear positions. You're saying that C-21 isn't really solving the problem of illegal firearms, and I do agree with you. Mr. Wall, you outlined many other solutions that could be implemented, and these do not have to be accompanied by a legislative action either, increasing financing or activities along the border. These could be done right away. Mr. Gélinas, you were talking about different sections of the bill when it comes to maximum sentences and the pointless effort to concentrate on magazine capacities. So maybe I would like to guide you towards a different aspect. So when we go to the section by section, I would be in favor of introducing an amendment. Of course, when it comes to assault-style weapons in 2021, there was a decision of the government to prohibit 1,500 types of assault weapons. But even recently, there were arms of similar categories that were used to kill police officers. So in order to reinforce Bill C-21 by introducing maybe provisions on assault-style weapons or ghost weapons, which are not traceable. So what legislative changes do you think would be necessary or useful? So let's start with Mr. Wall and then go to Mr. Gélinas. To answer your first question, you talked about modifications proposed in the legislation, which makes sense to us. These are the sections that give more powers to border agents. When people are immigrating to Canada, when they go through the Roxham Road, for instance, these people, if they go on to commit crimes here, border agents should have an easier way of accessing their files, as it were. So that might be beneficial over the medium to long term. Interesting. Thank you. We noted your suggestion. Mr. Gélinas? Well, as Stéphane was saying, when it comes to the provisions touching immigration, people who have used firearms should be in one way or another prohibited from becoming citizens of our country. But there isn't much in this bill other than cosmetic measures or that is based on an ideological or emotional analysis of the situation. A lot can be done. And we talked about strengthening border security. It is a well-known secret among police officers that we cannot intervene in certain indigenous reserves. The law simply doesn't apply there. And if you are smuggling, if you're a trafficker, and if you want to bring in contraband into Canada, well, you have 7,000 kilometers of border to choose from, but certain spots are easier because the police doesn't have access and they're not politically allowed to intervene. So, of course, criminals will tend to go for these territories. They will pay local organized crime and make sure that they have protection for their contraband. And once again, these firearms crossing through these territories, we can dig our heads in the sand and just pretend it doesn't exist, but it is reality. These end up hurting and or killing people in Montreal, Toronto, and elsewhere in the country. Mr. Wall, yes, please. If I can add one final point. as former police officers, we do understand the hesitation when it comes to Indigenous reserves. It's a very sensitive topic, but what we are suggesting is to work along the periphery of these reserves, just to make sure that all the roads leading up to the reserve are surveilled and inspections are carried out, and vehicles coming out of these reserves should be inspected if they're going to Montreal or Toronto or other places. And we should make sure that more boats are also being intercepted on waterways. So there is more to be done from a logistics point of view by the OPP, Sûreté du Québec, the RCMP. They patrol these waterways and they can intervene. So there might be collaboration agreements concluded with the U.S. authorities or entities, because a firearm trafficker, if they're using the waterways and if they want to get away from the police, once they are in the U.S., all police officers will have to just stop and turn back. So we have to work on the collaborative aspect and on the logistics of this. And we should also be able to work along the periphery of the reserves if we want to avoid a political crisis. But something has to be done. Thank you, Ms. Michaud.
6 minutes.
Monsieur Gélinas, I'd like to start with you, please. In your opening remarks, you covered many different parts of C21, but you also did make mention of the fact that there are existing red flag provisions in the criminal code, and that's true. If you look to existing sections 109 and 110, there are mandatory prohibition orders, there are discretionary prohibition orders. I think the testimony we've received on the proposed addition through C21 of this red flag laws has probably been the one that we as a committee are struggling with most. We have a number of witnesses who are quite concerned that the provisions in C21 are going to unfairly place the onus on someone who might be the victim of firearms-related violence to go through an already overburdened court system by themselves. And we've certainly heard from police services that their primary wish is that if someone finds themselves in a threatening position, they should always go to the police first. However, in our previous panel, Chief Evan Bray of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police did say that absolutely police should always be used as a first resort. He also was in favor of other avenues being available to people. So I guess my question to you is, do you see any instances where the provisions in Bill C-21, adding these new red flag provisions, going through a court system, do you see any instances where that might be preferable rather than using the police?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for the question. Well, as you underlined, the majority of the red flag provisions, they exist already in practical terms. For instance, when someone calls the Canadian Centre for Firearms, one of the first things you hear when you call is, if you have a question or a concern in relation to a spouse or an intimate partner, that's an option you can choose, and in that case, you would be immediately transferred to the relevant authorities. And you can then explain your concerns to them. But having said that, I fully endorse the positions expressed by other police officers that went before me. When there is a concern or a danger, yes, the police should be the first responder to be contacted. That is for sure. Because just showing up to enforce something will be a lot more complicated. And as you mentioned, courts are overburdened, of course. And some people might do that out of their goodwill to explain certain things, but the policing aspect will always be missing. because there's certain information that the police has, but the judge will not have that information. They will not have access to the data bank and the police expertise, and it will simply be someone who comes before them to talk about their concerns. And I also can't help but underline that these provisions can be used in untruthful manners when there are conflicts between former partners, for instance, spouses. Unfortunately, some people can use this against the other spouse.
To another question, but thank you for that answer. Monsieur Wall, I'd like to talk to you. In your opening statement, you made mention of the fact that sport shooters who belong to clubs and practice regularly with their handguns should be exempt from Bill C-21. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, Chief Evan Bray, did confirm the same thing, that it is his position that a handgun freeze is one method of reducing access to these types of firearms, but he does support law-abiding handgunners being able to practice their sport. I asked him if we could find a middle ground here by imposing stricter requirements for membership, demonstrating an actual need for the handgun, so regular practice and so on. Do you have any further comments on sort of the middle ground that we're trying to reach with respect to the provisions in C-21?
Oui, en fait, je suis d'accord.
Yes, I do agree with the chief on modifications to the bill. If the bill remains as is and is adopted, is passed as is, there should be some adaptation measures for hunters and sports shooters. They are members of clubs already, and they have to practice to keep their qualifications active. They have to practice regularly as sports shooter, and they have to do at least one competition per year. And these competitions are compulsory for them. So in that case, you would have license holder athletes practicing their sports. They could be exempted from the measures in the bill. So going back to the first point, we have a bill on handguns. But what is the problem in Canada? The problem is known, and we have to name it as is. The problem is that members of street gangs in all major Canadian cities, members of organized crime, they use illegal arms 9 times out of 10 to commit their crimes. So this should be the objective for the legislator, for the government.
We proceed now to the second round. Once again, this round will have to be abbreviated. We will go to Mr. Shifley for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for our witnesses for being here today, and thank you for your service you put in for many years. My question's going to come down, I'm sure over the many years you've worked, you heard about resources and how tough it was to get enough resources to do your job, and that hasn't changed. We've heard quite a bit over these hearings that it's getting tougher and tougher. So I'd like your opinion on this, please. In 2021, the SPVM launched a new police unit, the Integrated Team Against Firearms Trafficking, and between February and August 21, carried out 19 searches, made 17 arrests, and seized 27 illegal weapons, which is obviously good work. Do you feel the Bill C-21 could lead in a direction of already strained police resources and could actually help, or not help, but hinder targeted teams like this to do their job by removing resources?
If you allow me, I'll go ahead and answer the question. Bill C-21 does not respond to policing needs at all. You are right. There is a shortage of police officers. We are not even able to replace police officers who retire every year. We don't have enough people to respond to emergency situations. We're taking people away from other units which are deemed to be less crucial, but nonetheless all very important. And seizures made by police officers should be welcomed and encouraged. But we are only taking away a minuscule amount of the weapons coming in. One person was intercepted with 250 firearms. So we as police officers, we have to be lucky all the time, whereas criminals just have to be lucky once. So you can't really imagine the astronomical quantities of arms in circulation, firearms in circulation in Canada, so we will always be behind.
Thank you for that. Do you think one of the negative consequences of Bill C-21 that we could actually see an increase in smuggling operations? Since illegal handguns will be removed from being able to purchase, do you think it actually could cause an increase in smuggling? Perhaps I'll go to Mr. Wall for that.
I don't believe so. I don't think this will have a significant impact. The measures in the current bill, I don't think they will have a significant impact.
Thank you. Mr. Gélinas, you mentioned in your opening remarks that no smugglers received the current maximum sentence, being 10 years. So adding more years is really not doing anything. I'm very interested to hear that. That's the first time I've heard that today. Do you have any more data on that? And where did you get that resource from? And what type of sentences are you seeing them getting handled for smuggling?
The natural condition to research.
Ouais. Écoutez,
I don't have specific numbers, but what I can tell you from my experience is the following, and we have talked about this, many other colleagues who are firearms specialists. And we can go back to the example from past summer, William Dranville, who received a sentence of 4 or 5 years and only spent 1 year in a federal penitentiary. Maximum sentences in the criminal code are rarely, not to say never, handed out. Judges are bound by case law, and going from 10 to 14 can appear laudable as an effort, but will it have an impact, these 14 years, whereas the 10 years is never dished out as a punishment? So the maximum sentences, in any case, when they're given, these are exceptions.
Thank you. And I'd like to address this question, my last question with time remaining, to Mr. Gélinas and Mr. Wall, because you both said very interesting comments. You worded it a little differently, but you both said in your opening remarks very similar statements. Mr. Gélinas, you said that C-21 should be targeting the real, and I hope maybe nothing was lost in translation, but that's where it came across, was real, and I quoted that, weapons. And Mr. Wall, you said C-21 is not aimed at the right target. Perhaps you could expand on those two statements, gentlemen?
Ben, écoutez.
Well, as we mentioned, as I said, when you realize that about 10 to 16% of weapons seized in criminal offenses are only weapons originating in Canada, and all the action here is targeted towards people with a license who are very rarely implicated in crime. Of course, there's zero risk, doesn't exist. And we are abolishing minimum compulsory sentences for criminals. We're not really focusing on the spots along the border where the weapons are coming in, so we're not really targeting the right things.
You can finish your answer quickly, if you will.
Well, the comparison with road accidents, criminals taking the wheel when they're under the influence, for instance. So every year we have victims of traffic accidents, and it will be completely incoherent for the government to go ahead and ban all vehicles on the roads and thus punish the good drivers. So you have to take the problem and concentrate on the right solution, which is not the entirety of a population.
We go now to Madame Michaud. No, sorry. We go to Mr. Van Bynen, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Before I get into my questions, I want to be absolutely sure that the evidence that's being provided here and that's being considered by this committee is actually based on fact and not on opinion. And I would suggest that there is no evidence that there is lawlessness on the reserves, and in fact, police services have appeared as witnesses on guns and gangs, and that there is no higher evidence of lawlessness on reserves as there is in any urban or any population. And in addition to that, there is no evidence that there is an epidemic of gun crime from immigrants that are crossing on Roxham Road. So I just want to make sure that this record actually does reflect fact and not necessarily opinion. Having said that, I would ask Mr. Wall the question that the City of Montreal Council adopted a measure first proposed by your organization, the CCACV, to implement a helpline for parents. And having in mind what's important is prevention, this helpline actually was intended to see that children falling, that if there was a risk of children falling into violence, that there was some help for them. Do you think that this type of a project at a national level would be helpful?
Bien sûr, et
Of course, and thank you for the question. I can tell that you've done your research. The CCASV on 26th of January last year, we issued letters to the media and we held a press conference. We proposed actions at 3 levels of government to counter armed violence. Repression actions were part of what we proposed, and one of the first measures for the City of Montreal was accepted and implemented upon in the 3 weeks that followed the press conference. And this was a support service for parents whose children are facing risk of falling into violence. Right now, parents aren't necessarily up to the same technological speed as their children. So the children are on social networks and involved in networking, and parents aren't always keeping up. So when a parent realizes that a child has some sort of need or something going on outside the household, or a change in behavior, change in attitudes, maybe a smell of drugs having been used, parents find themselves hopeless in certain situations. So this helpline was established with specialists manning the phones, and people can call in for guidance. The City of Montreal is right now trying to find what organization would be best suited to manage the helpline. They're analyzing the situation, and hopefully in following weeks or months, the organization will be selected, and there will be a campaign, an awareness campaign that will accompany that, so that we can help parents and let them understand what young people might be facing before these young people or children turn into violent criminals. If we intervene at an early enough age, and if parents are there, responsible, and if they see that their children are facing serious situations, then that can help a lot of people.
Support the Government of Canada making investments in frontline community organizations who could help shoulder the burden of community safety. For example, do you support the investment of approximately $565 million in support of 684 crime prevention interventions that have been funded through the National Crime Prevention Strategy? Would you support that?
tout à fait.
Of course. You have to invest in prevention.
Support the $122.7 million that has supported 47 gang prevention and diversion projects funded through the Youth Gang Prevention Fund since 2017? And would you also support the $250 million investment the government has made through the Build Safer Communities Fund, which is providing direct funding to municipalities to strengthen local efforts and counter the social conditions that would lead to social behavior? All of those programs make sense to you, sir?
Je ne les connais pas tous.
I don't really know personally about these programs, but anything in terms of prevention is a good idea. Now, when you work with community organizations, that financing is not sustained. So governments must finance projects, but over the long term. You cannot just finance a project for a year or two, because after that, the organizations have to go out there seeking subsidies or financing from other resources. So financing, but of course, the accountability should also come with that over the long term.
Thank you for that. I think sustainability for these organizations is important. Another question.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bylen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
C'est maintenant, Madame Michaud.
Now, Ms. Michaud. 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were talking about a sensitive issue, intervening in Indigenous communities, and I proposed at multiple occasions to the Minister of Public Safety the idea of mixed squads or mixed teams, because you were talking about the OPP, police services from New York and from Indigenous communities. It's a very complex part of our country and of this part of the world. There's a border involved. So, for instance, Centaur is a program that the government of Quebec invested in. They appear a bit more concrete in the imagination of Quebecers, for instance. So much money for one ship because we know that firearms are arriving through the waterways, or investing in snowmobiles. When the waterways are frozen, they can still go out there and patrol. But the borders, of course, are part of federal jurisdiction. So wouldn't it be the role of the federal government to invest in these areas, to create these mixed teams where all stakeholders have to cooperate? And I understand what Quebec has done. I think it's working, so I want to hear what you think about this. But aren't we talking about steps to be taken by the federal government? Yes, the border is federal responsibility, as well as what's happening with Indigenous communities. When there was a comment that there's nothing illegal taking place, or no proof that anything illegal is taking place in these areas, I think it's an insult to the intelligence of police officers. But you are right. There have to be mixed teams. When it comes to social acceptability of this, Indigenous police services should also be integrated into federal police services, provincial service, or municipal services. We will only gain strength from unity, and this would also send out a good message to the public. If I can add something to this, yes, Quebec has an initiative. We have 6 more police officers, a boat, and a snowmobile. And Indigenous services are also involved, but it's not enough because it's a significant waterway, and Indigenous smugglers have also used high-speed boats. So smugglers, when they're faced with the police, they tend to be able to escape, and there's drugs also involved, other types of contraband, not just firearms. So you have organized crime, Indigenous smugglers, and street gangs that are coming together to work together. And the first victims of Indigenous criminals or smugglers are Indigenous individuals themselves, living mostly in these reserves. So we have to think about the victims when we're introducing acts or coming up with strategies for collaboration between different police services. Thank you.
Here for the final questions. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gélinas, I'd like to turn to you. I've read a brief from the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians. They've noted that Canada has one of the highest rates of suicides by firearms in the developed world. So 75% of Canada's firearms deaths are in fact by suicide. So that completely eclipses the death by homicide. And of course, they note too that guns are a particularly lethal method. They have a lethality rate of over 90%. So 9 out of 10 attempts with suicide by a firearm are successful. So this kind of goes onto the theme of the red flag law. The Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, they've consistently called for a point of care mechanism to allow emergency physicians to directly report to the police authorities any individual with a medical condition that substantially increases the risk of inappropriate firearms use and the potential for firearm injury and death. In your experience, what is the relationship like between the police and medical personnel currently, and what are your thoughts on what they are asking for? Like, in what ways do our laws need to be bolstered in order to allow physicians to more effectively communicate to police that someone might be at risk of using a firearms either against themselves or against another person?
Bon, la question est appropriée.
Well, it's a very appropriate question. I have a doctor friend of mine who had to do this type of communication, which was challenging. There should be a hotline, a direct line, available to physicians or healthcare professionals so that they can directly reach the relevant authorities if there's need for an intervention, if it is justified. Because the example I just mentioned, a friend of mine, they had to go through 10 different people to then receive a call back from a patrol who wasn't really understanding what was going on. So this was putting the physician in danger as well, because the source of this information has to be protected. They, of course, are a professional secret, which comes into play. They are protected in that sense, but there has to be a channel, a specific channel that could be used by healthcare professionals where they're not being transferred from one person to another, and they can directly talk to someone who actually knows about the different levels of authorization and interventions that are possible.
Thank you to all the witnesses for your sharing with us your time and your expertise today, and for helping us in our study. And that concludes our meeting for today. And thank you all for your time and attention as well. And with that, we are adjourned.